Most people never lose because of their enemies. They lose because of themselves. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to repeat the same mistakes over and over again? Why they walk away from opportunities they desperately wanted? Why they destroy relationships they claim to value? Why success often slips through their fingers at the exact moment it becomes possible? The strange thing about people is that they rarely recognize the role they play in their own downfall. They blame circumstances, they blame timing, they blame bad luck. But what if the real obstacle has been hiding somewhere much closer? What if some of the frustrations, disappointments, and failures you've experienced were not caused by the world around you, but by invisible patterns operating within you? I am the Watcher, and here in Shadow Insight, we explore the hidden mechanisms behind human behavior, the forces that shape our decisions long before we become aware of them. Tonight, we will uncover why people secretly sabotage their own lives, why this pattern is far more common than most realize, and why the true reason behind it is not what people usually think. Because by the end of this episode, you may discover that self-sabotage is not simply a bad habit. It may be a form of protection. If you enjoy exploring the hidden side of human nature, subscribe to Shadow Insight, leave a like, and share your thoughts below. Now watch carefully, because the behaviors that quietly hold people back often look completely harmless at first. Watch carefully. Self-sabotage rarely arrives wearing a warning sign. Most people imagine it as something dramatic, a reckless decision, a major mistake, a life-changing failure. But human nature rarely works that way. The behaviors that damage a person's life often appear reasonable in the moment. Have you ever noticed someone who constantly delays important decisions? They tell themselves they are waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity, the perfect conditions. Weeks become months, months become years, and eventually, nothing changes. From the outside, it looks like caution. In reality, something else may be happening. The same pattern appears in relationships. Someone wants love, they want connection, they want loyalty. Yet the moment they meet someone who genuinely values them, they begin creating distance. They stop communicating. They become cold. They focus on small flaws. Eventually, the relationship collapses. And afterward, they convince themselves they simply met the wrong person. Most people never stop to ask a simple question. Why does the same story keep repeating? The pattern also appears in careers. A promotion becomes available. A new project appears. An opportunity finally arrives. Yet instead of moving forward, some people suddenly become distracted. They procrastinate. They lose motivation. They find reasons to wait. Then they watch someone else take the opportunity they secretly wanted. The strange thing about people is that they often confuse self-sabotage with comfort. Comfort feels safe. Comfort feels familiar. Comfort asks for nothing. Growth demands uncertainty. Growth demands risk. Growth demands change. And many people would rather stay inside a familiar prison than walk into an uncertain future. This is why self-sabotage can be so difficult to recognize. It rarely feels destructive. It feels justified. It feels logical. It feels normal. The visible behavior is easy to see. The invisible reason behind it is much harder to understand. And that hidden reason is where the real story begins. Most people think self-sabotage is a lack of discipline, a lack of motivation, a lack of willpower. But with time, you begin to notice something deeper. Many people do not sabotage themselves because they want to fail. They sabotage themselves because part of them is trying to stay safe. This is where human behavior becomes fascinating. Imagine a person who grew up constantly criticized. No matter what they did, it was never enough. Every mistake was remembered. Every success was minimized. Over time, they develop an invisible belief. If I try and fail, I will be judged. Years later, that belief is still operating beneath the surface. They may desperately want success, but another part of them associates success with danger. So when an opportunity appears, an internal conflict begins. One side wants growth, the other wants protection, and protection often wins. Have you ever wondered why people sometimes fear success as much as failure? Because success creates exposure. Success attracts attention. Success raises expectations, and expectations create pressure. For someone carrying old emotional wounds, remaining small can feel safer than becoming visible. Jung believed that people often hide the parts of themselves they fear the most, not only from others, but from themselves. Deep inside many individuals exists what he called the shadow, the collection of fears, insecurities, unresolved emotions, and hidden beliefs that continue influencing behavior long after people think they have moved on. This is why self-sabotage often feels irrational. The conscious mind says, I want this, but the unconscious mind asks, are you sure it's safe? And when those two forces collide, people often choose the familiar path without realizing it. They postpone, they avoid, they retreat, then they create explanations afterward. The mind is remarkably skilled at justifying decisions that were actually driven by fear. The strange thing about people is that they rarely see the fear itself. They only see the excuses it creates. What looks like laziness may actually be fear of failure. What looks like indifference may actually be fear of rejection. What looks like procrastination may actually be fear of becoming responsible for a larger life. And once you begin to recognize this mechanism, a disturbing realization starts to emerge. Many people are not fighting against the world. They are fighting against parts of themselves they do not fully understand. But the story becomes even darker, because some forms of self-sabotage are not driven by fear alone. They are driven by something far more uncomfortable, something that hides inside nearly every human being. Watch carefully. Fear is only part of the story. There is another force that quietly shapes human behavior, and most people spend their entire lives avoiding it. The strange thing about people is that they build identities around their suffering. At first, this sounds absurd. Why would anyone hold on to something that hurts them? But human nature always reveals itself eventually. Imagine someone who has spent years seeing themselves as the victim, the overlooked employee, the misunderstood partner, the unlucky person, the one who never gets a fair chance. Over time, this story becomes familiar, it becomes comfortable, it becomes part of who they are. Then something unexpected happens. An opportunity appears, a healthy relationship arrives, success becomes possible, and suddenly they face a hidden threat. Because if their life changes, their identity must change too. And that is where many people begin sabotaging themselves. Not because they want pain, but because pain has become familiar. Have you ever noticed how some people seem more committed to their excuses than to their goals? Every solution creates a new problem. Every opportunity comes with a reason not to act. Every possibility is met with resistance. From the outside, it looks irrational. From the inside, it protects an identity that has existed for years. Nietzsche observed something important about human beings. People do not simply seek truth, they seek stability. Even when that stability is built on illusions, even when those illusions keep them trapped. Because changing your life is not only about changing your circumstances, it is about abandoning the version of yourself that those circumstances created. And that can feel terrifying. This is why some people destroy healthy relationships, because chaos feels familiar. This is why some people reject success, because struggle feels familiar. This is why some people repeatedly create conflict, because conflict gives them a role they understand. Most people never realize that self-sabotage is often a form of loyalty, a loyalty to an old identity, a loyalty to an old wound, a loyalty to a version of themselves that no longer serves them. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the greatest obstacle in your life is not fear. It is your attachment to the person you have become. Because if you truly changed, if you truly succeeded, if you truly healed, you would have to let go of a story you have been telling yourself for years. And many people would rather suffer inside a familiar story than risk discovering who they might become without it. But before you conclude that self-sabotage only happens to other people, there is one final question that deserves your attention. What if these same invisible patterns are operating inside you right now? Now the spotlight turns toward you. Because the easiest form of self-sabotage to recognize is the one happening in someone else's life. The hardest is the one happening in your own. Have you ever wondered why certain patterns keep returning? Different people, different places, different circumstances, yet somehow the outcome feels strangely familiar. The same disappointment, the same frustration, the same regret. Human nature has a remarkable ability to hide its deepest patterns beneath everyday behavior. A person tells themselves they are being cautious, but perhaps they are avoiding commitment. A person tells themselves they are waiting for the right time, but perhaps they are avoiding responsibility. A person tells themselves they have high standards, but perhaps they are protecting themselves from rejection. The surface explanation is rarely the full story. This is what makes self-sabotage so difficult to confront. It does not feel like self-destruction. It feels like common sense. Watch carefully. How often do you delay something that could genuinely improve your life? How often do you convince yourself that tomorrow will be better? How often do you focus on what could go wrong rather than what could go right? Most people assume their biggest enemy is somewhere outside of them, a difficult boss, an unfair system, a toxic person. And sometimes that is true. But with time, you begin to notice that the most powerful barriers are often invisible. They exist in the stories we repeat, the fears we protect, the identities we refuse to question. The strange thing about people is that they often wait for confidence before taking action. Yet confidence rarely comes first. Action comes first, then confidence follows. Many lives remain unchanged because people are waiting to feel ready. But readiness is often an illusion. The future rarely announces itself with certainty. Growth begins the moment you move despite uncertainty. And this is where self-awareness becomes dangerous. Because once you see the pattern, you can no longer pretend it is invisible. You begin noticing the excuses, the avoidance, the rationalizations, the moments when fear disguises itself as logic. And perhaps the most unsettling realization of all is this: the same mind that creates the prison often holds the key. Most people spend years trying to change their circumstances. Very few spend time examining the hidden beliefs that keep recreating those circumstances. And that difference changes everything. So why are you secretly sabotaging your own life? Because self-sabotage is rarely about failure. It is rarely about laziness, and it is rarely about a lack of intelligence or potential. More often, it is the result of invisible fears, old identities, and unconscious beliefs working quietly beneath the surface. Throughout this episode, we explored the visible behaviors that seem harmless at first: the procrastination, the avoidance, the repeated mistakes. Then we uncovered the hidden psychological mechanisms behind them, the part of the mind that seeks safety, even when safety comes at the cost of growth. And finally, we arrived at the uncomfortable truth most people never realize: the revelation promised at the beginning. Self-sabotage is often not an act of destruction. It is an act of protection, a protection system built by an older version of yourself, a version that learned to avoid pain, avoid rejection, avoid uncertainty. The problem is that the same protection that once kept you safe may now be keeping you trapped. Human nature always reveals itself eventually, and the people who transform their lives are not necessarily the strongest, the smartest, or the luckiest. They are often the ones willing to question the stories they have repeated for years, the ones willing to look into the shadows of their own minds, the ones willing to ask, what if the obstacle I've been fighting is not outside me? Watch carefully, because the moment you recognize a hidden pattern, it begins to lose its power over you. If this episode made you reflect on your own experiences, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to Shadow Insight for more explorations into the hidden side of human behavior. And remember, most people spend their lives trying to escape their circumstances. But what happens when the real prison was never around them, only within them?